Tonight on Nova.
I'm screaming to the other girl, there's a fire.
Mysterious arson fires break out around Los Angeles.
And then you start a race against the clock. When is the next one going to hit?
Once they started setting these fires, it gave them a sense of power, and they like it.
High-tech tools give investigators the edge as they hunt for the serial arsonist.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Raytheon. With a dedication to technology, Raytheon is a major builder of oil refineries and power plants all over the world. Raytheon, expect great things. And by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
Fire is one of nature's most entrancing displays. So extraordinary is the transformation taking place. But only at a distance. More than 5,000 people die in fires every year. The value of property destroyed is a staggering $11 billion. And that number would be 10 times greater if lost jobs and revenues were included. Even more disturbing, many of these fires are not accidents. Experts believe that 1 out of every 3 fires in America is intentionally set, including the devastating wildland fires that plague the western United States. The figure is an estimate. No one can be absolutely sure because arson is so difficult to prove. It takes a special breed of detective to uncover arson. He's part fireman and part cop, with a special understanding of fire science and the criminal mind. All of these skills were called upon recently to solve a case in California, which turned out to be one of the most interesting and surprising in the history of fire investigation. The story begins in 1991 with a fire at a fabric store called D&M Yardage, just south of Los Angeles. An employee at the store remembers it well, Evelyn Diaz.
I'm screaming to the other girl, there's a fire. So I run around, I'm going towards the back to get the fire extinguisher, and I get it, and I really don't know how to use it. You read real fast, and you go and try and put this fire out, figuring it's going to go out fast because it's so small, and it just kept burning and burning and burning, and just the more I'd put the extinguisher on it, the bigger it would get. And you could just see this cloud of smoke just coming over our heads, just billowing out. A few seconds later, we came out of the stores, we could hear all the windows bursting open.
D&M Yardage was a family-owned store selling inexpensive fabrics to a mostly neighborhood clientele. Many of its employees had worked there for years.
were all in a state of shock, crying, because we couldn't believe what was going on. Everything we helped to do was just going before our eyes and realizing that it could have been worse than what our lives could have been lost.
Firefighters are required to report the cause and origin of every fire they attend. If the circumstances are suspicious, fire investigators are assigned to the case. But their job won't be easy, according to veteran fire investigator John Orr.
Typically, arson's more difficult to investigate because the majority of your evidence is destroyed. Fingerprints, devices used to set the fire and such are consumed by the fire, or worse yet, destroyed by the firefighters in trying to put the fire out or overhauling it after the fire has been extinguished. So it makes it much more difficult to begin with. Another facet is an arson investigator typically isn't called to a scene until after the fire is knocked down substantially. And by the time we roll in, witnesses are gone now, the fire's out, there's nothing to look at, and the arsonist is generally gone as well.
But there are clues to be found in the remains of a fire. Investigators learn to spot them in fires that they set themselves.
We're going to put the device outside the door.
They work like an arsonist would, sometimes creating false trails. Here, firecrackers are planted on a child's mattress. A simple time delay device made from a cigarette and matches allows an arsonist to be safely away from his crime before any flames are ignited. Fuels that are used to help start a fire are called accelerants. Gasoline is the most common, but any number of petroleum products will do the job.
That'll hopefully provide a false indicator.
Applying an accelerant to a wall plug will help create the appearance of an electrical fire.
Yeah, set one right down there so when those things go... Here's one more. Okay, good. So when these go, this will go too.
Let's start a fire.
Should be good. Watch out for those firecrackers. Yeah, they're just to the...
Yeah, they're down underneath, I think.
The cigarette in the time delay device burns down and lights the matches, igniting a trail of paper. Using accelerants is dangerous business. They easily burn out of control. Arsonists have been arrested in hospital emergency rooms, victims of their own crime. The fire will only be allowed to burn for as long as it would take firefighters to arrive. But even fires that burn unattended rarely destroy everything. Every fire has a story to tell for those who know how to read the remains. The class is taught by veteran fire investigator Doug Allen.
Okay, we're gonna just do an overview on some surface burn patterns in here. First off, looking at the floor and moving toward that corner.
Burn patterns can indicate where the fire started. It's called the point of origin.
But going over to that chair, all the charring is on this side of it and toward the couch. So it's directing us over toward this couch for the origin of the fire.
If you know what to look for, the point of origin can reveal how the fire started in the first place.
Down here on the floor, there's a real obvious pattern right here that we'd want to take a look at, maybe smell it. And there's a strong smell of gasoline from the backside, still in the water, being protected by the water, keeping it from evaporating. Typical bedroom fire, kid's bedroom. You might enter this one and say, well, something smoldering in the mattress. We've got some severe burning down in there. But the one red flag that should hit you is the burn pattern on the wall, the charring. It's an inverted V. It's coming in. That's sign of a highly accelerated fire. You know, had that been an accidental fire, it would have been a wide V, spreading out, mushrooming at the top. This one pulls in. So that tells us we've got a very fast, rapid buildup in that corner. We have an electrical plug there that may have to be eliminated. Typically, electrical plug won't cause that kind of a V pattern. So that, in this particular scenario, that one pattern should raise a red flag that you need to explain.
The burn pattern suggests that an accelerant was used, but some kind of proof must be found.
Probably within this mattress are some things for evidence. What
Most
looks like
accelerants can be detected in samples sent to a forensic lab for testing. Petroleum products have a unique chemical composition, which can be broken down and graphed. A sample can be identified by comparing its pattern with those of known accelerants. An identification helps bring investigators a step closer to the criminal. Common examples are paint thinner, kerosene, and charcoal lighter. Even the brand of some accelerants can be determined. In this case, it's Coleman camping fuel.
Determining the fire cause and origin is fun to investigators, and it's nice to have a lab sample come back saying, yes, this was gasoline set in this area, even though you couldn't smell it. But the real thrill of it is the pursuit of the suspect himself and identifying him, even when you have very little to go on.
The fire at D&M Yardage in Los Angeles had burned quick and hot, but investigators were unable to find any accelerants at all. Was it arson? What made it suspicious was that there were two other store fires nearby on the same day. One did serious damage to a thrifty drugstore. No accelerants could be found there either. The county sheriff decided to contact specially trained agents with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. ATF is the federal agency most concerned with arson. Mike Matassa got the call. He concluded that all three fires were remarkably similar.
The types of businesses they were, how close together they were, and the fact that in all three of them, he had no eyewitnesses. The fires just sprang out of nowhere, which kind of led to the feeling that there was some sort of a delay device used. And right there, I mean, it's pretty evident that there's a good chance that you had the same person or persons doing those three fires.
Of the additional suspicious circumstances surrounding that.
Another agent involved in the case was Glenn Lucero, a seasoned investigator from the Los Angeles Fire Department.
Indicated to them that they might have had two separate fires.
April Carroll was brought in from Firearms to coordinate the team's effort. Further investigation turned up other similar fires in and around Los Angeles. Some of them had occurred months earlier. On December 10th, the People's Department Store, open since 1938, was completely destroyed. On December 30th, two stores within view of each other went up in flames. And on the day after Christmas, three stores on the same street burned simultaneously.
We knew that we were dealing with something very serious. And then you start a race against the clock because you're fearful if this pattern is a pattern indeed and it's gone on for such a period of time, then when is the next one going to hit? And what is the danger that the next one could have? And there were millions of dollars in damage, property lost in some of these fires.
So many similar fires suggested arson, but no accelerants had been found at any of them.
This is D&M Yardage fire.
One thing did stand out. They all shared a unique point of origin.
This is the thrifty store. The point of origin would have been, again, in the stuffed cushions for lawn furniture.
The fires had all started among cushions and pillows filled with plastic foam stuffing. Modern plastics and foams are derived from oil, and like gasoline, can accelerate a fire all by themselves. To understand how materials like plastic can help burn down a building, experts from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms study a more familiar source of fire.
We will use this example of the candle as our vehicle for trying to understand what makes a fire tick.
James Quintieri is professor of fire protection engineering at the University of Maryland.
Let's take a look at it more closely and maybe tell me what you see.
Heat from the flame is turning the wax into liquid, which is absorbed by the wick. Remarkably, the wick remains intact even as the candle continues to burn.
Now we want to find out what we mean when we say it burns. We want to find out what burns, all right? Let me try this and see what happens. I'm going to blow this flame out. What happened there?
And you lit it without even touching the wick.
Lit it without even touching the wick. So that smoke, that white vapor, was burnable. What do we think that vapor is?
The vapor is gas, made of liquid candle wax that is boiled off the wick. The vapor is what fuels the flame. But what makes the fuel burn? A metal screen can be used to dissect the flame. It reveals that the fuel moving out from the wick doesn't burn immediately. First, it must mix with the surrounding air. When the ratio is optimal, molecules from the air and fuel combine in a chemical reaction that we call fire.
So we have the air and the fuel separated by this thing we call the flame. All fire works on this principle.
A candle, a lighter, even a cigarette is designed to control the amount of fuel to be burned. Without such control, a fire can grow with frightening speed. This chair is stuffed with plastic foam. It has the fuel potential of 50,000 candles and no mechanism to control the release. The steady heat of a cigarette accidentally dropped between the cushions can create a disaster. Initially, the burning cigarette creates a smoldering fire, which breaks down the foam stuffing into vaporous fuel. When there's enough heat and oxygen, it starts to flame. More heat produces more fuel, and the fire accelerates rapidly. Smoke and other products of the fire, including unburnt fuel, collect beneath the ceiling. Within 3 minutes, the temperature at the ceiling reaches 1,000 degrees, heating the contents of the entire room near the point of ignition. The carpet and other furnishings start to break down into vaporous fuels. Then, within seconds, in a process called flashover, everything in the room erupts into flame. No life survives flashover. After all the oxygen in the room is consumed, a pulsing backdraft sucks in air from the outside, depletes it in a surge of burning, then breathes in more. All this took place in less than 4 minutes and started with a smoldering cigarette. A fire like the one at D&M Yardage doesn't require the use of an accelerant, if you know what you're doing. This arsonist apparently did, except for one mistake. A third fire that day in a floral supply store was quickly extinguished. At the point of origin, a valuable piece of evidence was recovered: an arsonist's time delay incendiary device. It was made of a cigarette and matches, attached with a rubber band. The device was found folded inside a piece of yellow-lined paper.
We decided, and our supervisors agreed by both departments, that we had to expand this. This was potentially a very serious problem. Could very well involve a serial arsonist. So at that point, we immediately formed the task force. ATF put a lot of manpower immediately at our disposal to assist.
Bulletins describing the fires were distributed throughout Greater Los Angeles in the hope that other investigators might provide additional leads. In less than a week, 19 fires were identified with the same MO, or modus operandi. As their locations were mapped, a pattern began to emerge.
Every one of these are right next to a freeway, and that would give whoever was responsible easy access to start the fire and easy access to get away.
But what possible motive would anyone have for starting all these fires?
The National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime at Quantico, Virginia, is a law enforcement...
ATF collaborates with the FBI on a study of the motives for arson. Gus Gary is an ATF agent with an interest in psychology.
The motives that we identify for arson fall into 6 categories. The first motive is vandalism. These are fires that are generally set by youthful offenders for no apparent reason. While many of these fires are not deemed significant, it should be pointed out that vandalism is identified as the motive in nearly half of the arson arrests in the United States. Another motive that we often see is that of excitement. The excitement motive in fire setting is exemplified by the Devil's Night fires that plagued the city of Detroit, Michigan in the 1970s and 80s.
During those years, inner-city Detroit was full of abandoned buildings. They became targets for thrill seekers, especially around Halloween. Another motive is revenge. A 1986 hotel fire in Puerto Rico is a tragic example. A small nuisance fire that was set during a labor dispute soon burned out of control. 97 people were killed.
These offenders who act out of a sense of revenge oftentimes act out against society in general. They feel they've been wronged. They've always been wronged by society, and they never have gotten a fair shake. And therefore, they set fires at targets that appear to be random, and it confounds us as we attempt to investigate these.
There is arson for profit. The owners of this Sacramento home were nearly bankrupt and hoped to collect $4 million in fire insurance. Investigators found that accelerants had been used, evidence which eventually led to a criminal conviction. Arson is also used by extremists to achieve political objectives. Recently, abortion clinics as well as animal research laboratories have been attacked. And sometimes arson is used to hide another crime, a burglary, even murder. Among these fire setters, there is a small but extremely dangerous subset. Serial arson accounts for only about 15% of all arson fires, but they are some of the most destructive.
We had several of them express to us that once they started setting these fires, that it gave them a sense of power. And they like that sense of power. It gives them a sense of domination or control. And as the one offender talked about being able to sit on top of the hill after setting the fires week after week and seeing the fire trucks in the town in turmoil. It gave that offender a sense of power. They said that they'd never had before in their life, and they liked it.
The FBI has also developed a psychological profile of a serial arsonist. It has been used in the training of a generation of fire investigators.
The standard profile of a serial arsonist is very similar to serial killers. They're loners typically. They have difficult times in relationships, spotty work histories, sometimes have physical disabilities, skin disorders, alcoholics, and almost to a T, every one of these 10 or 12 that I was acquainted with or arrested fit that profile or that mold.
The ATF investigation in Los Angeles was beginning to pay off. The arson team uncovered another series of fires remarkably like those they were investigating. But these fires had been set hundreds of miles to the north 4 years before. In Fresno, California, a fabric store had been totally destroyed. And several days later in Bakersfield, there were 2 more fires. They were quickly extinguished, but at one of them, a craft supply store, an incendiary device was recovered by Captain Marvin Casey.
I had found a cigarette match device there at the Craft Mart store, and I thought it was unusual to have another store going about 45 minutes later. So I was called to respond over to that store. And after arriving there, I found that there was no reason for that fire to have started either. There was no accidental causes for it.
The device that Captain Casey recovered was made of a cigarette with 3 matches attached by a rubber band. It was found along with a piece of partially burned yellow-lined paper. The materials were examined and processed for fingerprints. To make a latent print visible on paper, it is bathed in the chemical ninhydrin. After treatment, any amino acids from sweat on the fingertips will turn purple. Of course, there isn't always a print, but the device from Craft Mart had one. The question was, who did it belong to? A print without a suspect used to be worthless. It was impossible to search for a match through the millions of impressions on file. But over the past decade, California has pioneered the use of a computerized fingerprint database. Today, prints of convicted felons are routinely scanned into the system. An unknown print can be compared to the entire database in minutes. The computer identifies 2 features found only in the ridged, gripping skin of the hands. A Y-shaped ridge is called a bifurcation, while an ending ridge is simply where one stops. Everyone has these features, but in different places. The computer records their location, then searches for a similar constellation. The machine provides a list of likely candidates. It takes an expert's visual examination to make a match.
When I got the paperwork back, they said they couldn't find a match on it. So I said, well, you know, it looks like we're kind of at a dead end here, you know. Either that or the guy had never been in trouble, and he didn't have a criminal record to where his prints wouldn't be on file.
But Captain Casey had found an interesting pattern to the 1987 fires. Like the Los Angeles fires, they all took place near a highway, but this time it was the same highway.
There was 3 in the Fresno area, and then we worked 2 fires in the Tulare area, still going down the 99 highway, and then later that day worked 2 fires in Bakersfield to craft stores. And the fires ended there, and you can see the road still continues on down into Los Angeles.
It looked like the arsonist had spent time in Fresno, then traveled south to Los Angeles. Captain Casey had a disturbing thought. He knew a number of men who had made that very trip on the same day. They were colleagues on their way home from a conference of arson investigators.
Could it be, could it be somebody that had attended the conference and they were just traveling through? They set the fires up there during the middle of the conference, and did they set the fires in Tulare after the conference was over that day at noontime, and then set the two at 2 o'clock here in Bakersfield? So it's a possibility,
He developed a list of everyone who had attended the conference from Southern California. There were far too many names to pursue.
It happens occasionally where firemen do go bad. It's happened primarily in volunteer organizations where their controls over who they hire or use as a volunteer isn't quite as tight. There are a lot of people that just like to be around the fire station, the fire activity, and the excitement of it. They will set the fire and then actually become the hero. They'll be the one that reports the fire and will actually go in and try and evacuate the building. They're the only ones that knew that fire was started, how it was started, and by them. And they're getting an inadvertent yet warped attention by being there and experiencing this.
Two years later, Captain Casey was alerted to another series of store fires, also in Central California.
Now, action news at 11. A 3-alarm fire in downtown San Luis Obispo sends fire trucks and almost 4 dozen firefighters right into the middle of Farmers Market tonight. Good evening. At 11 o'clock, fire investigators tell Action News tonight that the blaze is suspicious in its origin.
Again, there was an arson conference taking place, this time just south of San Francisco. Before the conference started, there was a fire at a Woolworth's in Salinas. The day the conference ended, 8 more fires erupted in and around San Luis Obispo, all in retail stores, all near Highway 101, the main route from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Captain Casey went back to his list. He marked the names of those who had attended both conferences and who had returned by car to Los Angeles alone.
And then I just kept a list of 10 names. It soon developed down to 10. What I felt, they had attended the conference in '89, they attended the conference in Fresno in '87.
Fire departments usually keep their employees' prints on file.
This one.
Print cards from the 10 suspects were collected for comparison with the latent print from Craftmart.
Ridge isn't there, so that can't be it.
They represented some very well-known fire investigators in our industry. You never know about a person, People have basically 3 different lives that I feel like that they live. They have their social life at work, where people know them, and then they have their home life, that's their private life, that just their family knows them, and then we all have our secret life that nobody gets into. And I think sometimes people just let their secret lives go wild on them sometimes, and they can't control it, and I believe that's what happened in this case. The person was out of their surroundings. They were in places that they could associate with other people, like at fire scenes and fire investigation symposiums and conferences. And he could just become a Superman. He could do what he wanted to do.
In a few days, word came back from the lab. The print found on the device did not match any of the new list of suspects. 2 years later, was the same arsonist burning Los Angeles?
Hey, Jeff, can I help you?
Every day, more reports poured into the investigating team.
It was very crazy. It was something huge that we had to try to narrow. In the first couple of weeks, that's what we did. We re-interviewed witnesses from previous fires, re-examined evidence, resubmitted fingerprints that had been located on previous fires.
When the team learned about the print Captain Casey had recovered, they requested a copy. Prints are constantly being added to the computerized database, so a new search was run. This time, the prints of local law enforcement officers were on file.
We were notified that the County Sheriff's latent print section had contacted our office and made a positive identification on the print from the Bakersfield incendiary device.
So Glenn and I went over there, and we talked to the original fingerprint technician that did this for us, Mr. Hobbs, and he pointed out to us who indeed the fingerprint came back to, and he was even familiar with who this individual was.
At that time, they told us that it was a positive identification to a man named John Orr. The room went deathly quiet at that time. We were stunned. The reason being is John Orr was a well-known, widely respected arson investigator from the Glendale Fire Department, which is a city just adjacent to the city of Los Angeles. We felt that, well, if his fingerprint got on that incendiary device, it must have been for another reason other than the fact that he could have been responsible for placing it there and igniting it.
We knew that there had been a conference of arson investigators north of Bakersfield in Fresno, and that he would have traveled that route coming back that day. So it was likely that he could have stopped and, had some sort of involvement. He was very well known in the business. If he would have wanted to stop and say, "What can I do?" he would have been welcomed, I'm sure, by Captain Casey and everyone else. In fact, we specifically asked, did any other investigators from outside departments that were cruising through the area after the conference come by and discuss this case with you or look at the evidence? And the answer was emphatically no, they did not.
It was clear at that point that there was no reason for his print to legitimately be on that piece of paper.
But John Orr's print had been examined when his name turned up on Captain Casey's list of suspects. Why hadn't a match been found then? A latent print is laid down accidentally and generally lacks the detail and clarity of an inked print. There's some risk that a match will not be recognized. Nancy Masters knows the territory well. She's been a latent print analyst for 26 years.
I'm going to look at my latent first and find that bifurcation that opens to the left and down. In the inked impression, I found the bifurcation that opens to the left and down. And now I'm interested in finding some more of these characteristics. I feel very comfortable when I can find in excess of, say, 7 or 8 characteristics in which I do have a match, and I don't see any characteristics in there that do not match, and that is just as important. There should never be a characteristic in one of the prints that is not in the other print.
Experts found 13 characteristics that matched John Orr's print and no discrepancies. Eventually, the analyst who earlier had failed to find a match acknowledged his mistake. So who was John Orr? He was born and raised in Glendale, a suburb of Los Angeles.
This is heading towards the hills in Glendale here. It's really a pretty little town.
John Orr lived on this street in a house owned by his fourth wife. He was the youngest of 3 sons, raised by parents who never got along very well. He was always drawn to fire or police work. After high school, he joined the Air Force and was trained in fire suppression. Later, he tried unsuccessfully for a job with the Los Angeles Police Department. During his 17 years at the Glendale Fire Department, he was considered something of a rebel. He liked to wear a beard, which was against regulations, and his impulsive driving took its toll on department vehicles. But as a fire investigator, he got high marks. Glendale had an unusual problem with wildland fires, and he demonstrated an uncanny ability to find their cause and origin. He would often arrive at a site already well worked by his colleagues and uncover an incendiary device. He organized local seminars and lectures on fire investigation and went on to achieve national recognition with a series of articles in the American Fire Journal.
I found it very uncomfortable knowing that you were going after one of your own. The other fire investigators that I've come in contact with over the past 25 years have always been very professional, very dedicated people, and the thought that maybe one of them might be associated with any of these fire scenes was very disconcerting to me.
It was very depressing the day, especially the first day we kind of developed him as a suspect, and then the more we corroborated it and started to find even more and more of the facts, it was somebody that we maybe wanted to get even more than the routine suspect, because it was just so, disloyal to take the public's respect and the others he worked with and turn it around and become the opposite. It was devastating.
Orr was now the prime suspect in a lengthy list of fires with the same MO. But the fingerprint from Bakersfield tied him to only one of them. A surveillance was set up with the hope of catching him in the act.
Now he's back in the number 2 lane and he's traveling approximately 70 miles an hour, still eastbound on the 210.
When investigators learned that Orr would be attending an arson training course, plans were made to follow him around the clock. Ken Croak drove one of the 10 cars involved in the surveillance.
As soon as he got onto the freeway, he ranged between 90 and 100 miles an hour the whole time he was driving, which poses a great problem because as he's tearing down the freeway, everyone else is doing 65, 70. If you see a tail of 10 cars doing 100 miles an hour, it's kind of obvious what's going on. John would pick off a surveillance quicker than a normal person because I'm sure during his investigations he's conducted surveillances. And if you've been trained to do surveillance, it's very easy to what we call burn a surveillance.
For today's exercise, the target is a red Thunderbird. Croak has visual contact. In her surveillance, this is known as the point position.
If I was on point, I would try to keep a few cars between us, try to keep the same rate of speed. At the same time, constantly talking into the radio, updating the surveillance team that we're passing such a mile marker. We're traveling at 65 miles an hour, and this would be the number 6 lane. See something like this, you'd say he's braking, he's slowing down, he's now down to 55 miles an hour. I would pass him in a situation like this and let another member come up to him. And the unit in the best position will call out and say, okay, I've got him, and they'll continue on with the narration. I would exit somewhere up ahead here and wait for them to pass by, and you'll hear it. You don't have to ask. The point person will say, okay, we're passing this exit, that exit. And as soon as they pass your exit, you join back in and get set to take the point whenever you can.
Orr was tailed to San Luis Obispo, where he stopped at a convenience store. He was known as a committed non-smoker, but nevertheless purchased 2 packs of cigarettes. Because he was so difficult to keep up with, a tracking transmitter was attached to the underside of his car. The surveillance team watched and waited.
The last day of the course, and the day that we had determined, based on MO, there might be some activity, John discovered the device on his vehicle. One of the wires had come loose and was hanging down below the bumper, and he noticed it when he'd made a stop, and it was a circus from there.
Something was going on here that I really didn't know exactly what, and I didn't put two and two together until I got back into town and was rereading my notes for my book and remembering that there was a fire in that very same town several years before that I had witnessed. And the only thing I could possibly think of was that the local cops felt that maybe somebody attending that conference and that Fresno conference that happened in 1987 had developed some suspects, and lo and behold, I must be one. I passed my business card off to the local police agency. At the time I found the tracking device and asked them, hey, you got something to talk about? Come talk to me.
And then something unexpected happened that cast a strange new light on the case. A letter by John Orr to a literary agent came into the hands of investigators. It described a novel that he had written about a serial arsonist.
It's interesting, there's one paragraph in particular that reads, my novel, Points of Origin, is a fact-based work that follows the pattern of an actual arsonist that has been setting serial fires in California over the past 8 years. He has not been identified or apprehended, and probably will not be in the near future. As in the real case, the arsonist in my novel is a firefighter. And he's the only one that knew that, because we didn't at that point.
I just drew from my experience, my research, and took a little literary license when I wrote to this literary agent in theorizing that all these fires might have been related to the same individual, and it may have been a firefighter.
When investigators obtained a copy of the text, it offered a tantalizing glimpse into the author's mind.
Well, his description of the feelings and emotions that went into his character, and then taking that in my own mind and thinking, so this is how John must be feeling. And that was an interesting light to shed on it, because that's all we were looking for, is why is John doing this? How could he do this?
John Orr had also shot these home videos. Some were of fires he was suspected of starting. In the novel, the firefighter turned arsonist was named Aaron. Orr wrote, Aaron occasionally walked into the area where his fire was burning, but only well after it was discovered and there were other people watching. He was a loner and insecure. His fires gave him the much-needed attention that he craved. He was, after all, the only one who knew how the fire started. The thick black smoke stained the clear blue sky, much as an oil spill attacks a clear blue sea. To Aaron, the smoke was beautiful, causing his heart rate to quicken and his breathing to come in shallow gasps.
In my opinion, it wasn't very well written. It wasn't a very interesting story, and I think if I were actually reading a novel, I would have put it down. But because of being so in-depth into this investigation, it was fascinating reading, because there was just so many similarities. And every time I would turn the page, it was incredible to be reading what I was investigating, having been written by the suspect.
Aaron got a sudden rush from the increase in flames and wanted to get nearer. It was unlikely that he would ever become a suspect. His time delay devices gave him from a couple of minutes to almost an hour before the fire actually started. When the fire did start, Aaron was always some distance away from it. Evidence had, however, been left behind on at least 2 occasions. Remnants of the devices were found in 2 stores he had attempted to burn.
didn't really occur to me that it could mean anything. I just said, like, oh, this is kind of interesting, let me read it. And then I started reading it. I'm like, oh, wow, strange. One of the paragraphs had our store name on it. And then I had to read it over and over again to make sure that was us. And I just got a strange feeling that that was the guy after all.
It was a very quiet, kind of a solemn day when we made the arrest. It was very overcast and kind of drizzly and sort of fit the mood, I think, of everybody involved.
On December 4th, 1991, John Orr was arrested and charged with arson. ATF agents searched his home and office. A briefcase was found in his car. Among its contents were binoculars, a pack of cigarettes, 2 packs of matches, 2 lighters, and a bag of rubber bands. During questioning, he said they were materials for a class he was teaching. He admitted nothing.
If I had one thing to do over again, it's the preparation and the actual interview, because I think that John, in a way, did want to talk about it and was looking to get caught and was ready to confess or talk about it. I hope that someday he will talk about it so that we can learn from it.
Morning, Mr. Orr. How are you? The John Orr we saw at the seminars, the John Orr we saw when we assisted investigations, was really a facade of a person that was a lot more troubled and had a lot darker side to them on the inside.
Can you say anything about the charges? It's important.
And every now and then, through interviews of different people, friends, associates, we had a little glimpse into that side. He was much more of a loner than I was aware of. There were very few people that I came in contact with that knew the real John Orr. And I think that was consistent with our psychological profiles of a serial arsonist.
John Orr was charged with 8 counts of arson in Los Angeles and 5 counts in Central California. He maintained that he was innocent.
He had claimed, I guess, that it was not his print. If his print got there, then it was kind of a conspiracy that I had with the federal government trying to build up my resume. And I thought, how ridiculous, you know, what do I want to build up my resume for? You know, I'm just going to work for the Bakersfield Fire Department as a fire investigator. Where am I going to go?
John Orr was found guilty on 3 counts of arson in Central California and sentenced to 30 years in prison. At a second trial in Los Angeles, he admitted guilt as part of a plea bargain. Despite his guilty plea, Orr continues to act as though he is innocent.
The entire truth isn't out yet. There's more to the story.
Versus John Leonard Orr, case number BA.
The story isn't over. Early in 1995, John Orr was arraigned on 26 new charges, including 4 counts of murder resulting from deaths in a 1984 arson fire. Orr was also charged with the 1990 College Hills fire, which damaged or destroyed 64 homes in his own community of Glendale, California.
Educators and home viewers can purchase this and many other NOVA programs for $19.95 plus shipping and handling. To order, call 1-800-255-9424. Nova is a production of WGBH Boston. Funding for Nova is provided by Merck. Pharmaceutical research, improving health, extending life. Merck, committed to bringing out the best in medicine. And by Raytheon. With a dedication to technology, Raytheon is a major builder of oil refineries and power plants all over the world. Raytheon, expect great things. Major funding for Nova is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by annual financial support from viewers like you.
This is PBS.